Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm glad to see some familiar faces and maybe some new folks too. So here we are for the second half of our Introduction to Nonviolent Communication. And just as a quick review, last time we really talked about some foundational aspects of nonviolent communication, the role of empathy, the difference between universal human needs and the strategies we use to meet those needs, how to tell the difference between a need and a strategy, and how to make effective action requests. And I was reviewing the session and I was so pleased with how much engagement there was. That's always really fun for me, and I'm hoping it makes it more interesting for you all. And as I mentioned in our last session, that we're going to focus on a few things this time to put some of what we learned last time into practice, of practical use. So some of that's going to include a little bit more about observations and the difference between observations and judgments, evaluations, assumptions, the storylines that we often attribute to actions that sometimes are accurate and many times are not accurate, and how to sort of be aware of when we're operating in that place of believing we know what's going on without really considering other possibilities. And all of this is in preparation for connecting conversations, or what we sometimes call difficult conversations. Before we dive into content, I would like to take a moment for some connection with everyone, and I'd like to hear from a few of you about anything that might have happened with you through your own communication with someone else, or in response to some situation you were in, where you might have utilized some of what we talked about in our last session. And if you didn't, that's okay. If you did, I'd love to hear briefly from a few of you about a specific situation, or something, even if it had to do with something with yourself, perhaps some self-empathy or some self-gratitude, or something with someone else or a situation. So take a moment, touch it and see if you've got anything, and then raise your physical hand or your mechanical hand if you'd like to share briefly in a minute or so. Anybody have anything? Okay, so I'm guessing either that nobody has anything, or there's a little discomfort about being the first person to raise your hand and speak into the group. And that's fine. It's important to me to make sure that people have a chance to speak and share their experiences for two reasons. One, I think it's more interesting. Two, it creates more community and more connection around people's experiences, and it's an opportunity for others to learn and grow. For me, it really meets my needs around collaboration and shared space and contribution, which are all things that are important to me. So, and I see Natalie saying, yeah, you're new, and Robin, you weren't here the last time. That's fine. I'm wondering, for those of you who weren't here, did you get a chance to look at or listen to the recording? And you can, yeah, I'm seeing some people shake their hands. Okay, so those of you who are new to this session but didn't get the first session, there may be some things that are confusing, or that you're not necessarily going to completely understand. That's okay. We'll work with that, and if I can clarify things, I will. And it might be a session where you're more listening and sort of taking things in, because it is a scaffolded class. Okay. So one more chance. Anybody have anything to share? Small, large, anything that might have to do with self-empathy, empathy for someone else, imagining what someone else's needs are, connecting with your own universal human needs, perhaps even thinking about requests differently, anything at all.
Well, I will share one, and I was thinking about this, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but it was like a friend was getting some really difficult, hard health information about her son. Mm-hmm. And I even looked at that list of things not to say, to make sure yeah, that was one thing I faced.
Thanks for sharing that, Gail. It can be so difficult when a friend or a colleague or someone we know shares some news that's unhappy or scary or difficult, because most of us are driven by wanting to be supportive, wanting to show care, wanting to connect, yet we don't always really know how to do it. So looking at that list of empathy blockers in your handout can be a great place to start. And simply joining the person where they are, which is, gosh, I can imagine how difficult this is for you. It might be really scary and painful to receive this news. As I listen to you share this, I notice how an urge to support you and show you some care. Very simple. Now, in order to do it, it often means we have to quiet our own distress or anxiety. And that's hard to do. That's some of the practice of NVTC that comes in with self-empathy and self-connection. Yeah? Okay. So last time we touched briefly on observations, and we used that in practice when we were practicing the gratitude grams, the gratitude practice. And I spent some time on that because it's the same protocol. It's the same nonviolent communication protocol that we use with gratitude that we also use pretty much with any other nonviolent communication related expression, whether it's sharing something that pained us, sharing something that delights us, sharing and bringing up things that cause anxiety or conflict or difficulty, what we sometimes call difficult conversations. So when we talked about observations and gratitude, it was, what is the specific thing, action, words that someone said or did that met some of your needs? And this is really important because the more specific you can be in an observation, the better the chance that it won't stimulate an argument or a disagreement or questioning about what your intention is in bringing it up. It's not, when we talk about gratitude, it's not praise. It's when you said this and this and this, when you said, or when you did this thing, whatever it is, I felt grateful and appreciative. So with difficult conversations, which is going to be the focus of this meeting, the more specific you can be about what you're not enjoying or what you want more of, and make it one thing at a time. So instead of piling on, instead of what Esther Perel calls kitchen sinking, where you've got 10 complaints about someone, instead you operate one specific thing at a time. And the more specific you can be, that is lacking in words of judgment or evaluation or blame, the easier it will be for the other person to receive you. So generally in nonviolent communication, observations are sometimes framed as, here's what a camera would capture, free of kind of judgments, free of storytelling, free of assumptions, more, here are what the facts are. This is sometimes hard to do, especially when we already have assumptions and stories about someone else's intention. Yeah? This is something humans do. We're constantly evaluating our environment for safety. It's part of being human. We've done it since the time of caves, of living in caves. If we're not hyper alert to our environment, we're more at risk, and it's not as safe. This is particularly true for minoritized groups. It's particularly true for people who have less structural power, who, because of how our culture and systems work, have built-in bias against them. Some of this is obvious, and some of it is so integrated in who we are as people, we can have blind spots about it. And this causes a lot of pain and violence and difficulty for many individuals and groups of people. So there's all kinds of tips and hints about how to make what I'll call a clean observation. And one way to do that is to first pay attention to the story you have in your head about it, and maybe even exaggerate it to the point of it being ridiculous, to come back to what's actually happening. So I'm going to give you a brief example of how I was reactive about something that happened and was not in any way using a clean observation. I was being completely impacted by my trigger, my storyline, and my assumptions. Okay, here's the story, and I'll be as brief as possible. I used to work in a setting where I had to travel around a lot, and where I parked and how much time it took me to get into a certain building, because I was a school social worker, was important to me. And the main building that I worked in had a parking lot that had dedicated parking spaces for people like me, school social workers, speech therapists, people who came and went frequently. And there were 4 or 5, well, actually, I think there were, in my storyline, there were 6 or 7 of these parking spaces, and they all had signs that said, this parking space is specifically for these kinds of helpful, supportive people in this environment. And I would often show up at this building in the morning, which is across from High Point School. And what I noticed was parents were parking in these parking spots because it was fastest and closest to get their kids to High Point School. And I would be coming in and I'd try and get a parking space, and they'd, you know, some of these spots would be full of these parents. And I used to get I would get so aggravated. I would just be really incensed about this. So for those of you who were here last time, can you help me out here and name, what do you think some of the feelings I was having were? And you can just unmute and holler them out. And if you're not comfortable speaking in the group, you can write them in the chat. But based on what I'm telling you, and again, you can use your feelings list in your handout. Just give me an idea based on what I'm saying. What do you think I was feeling? Impatience. Yep, I sure was impatient. What else?
Angry.
Angry. Yep, I was definitely angry.
Tense.
Tense. I'm not sure who said that, but yes, that kind of stuff makes me really tense. What else? Use your feelings sheet in your handout, or imagine what it might be like for you in that position. What might you be feeling? And you can extrapolate and make an empathy guess. Gosh, Lisa, were you feeling blank? What else?
Maybe a little scared about being late for an appointment?
Yeah, a little anxious about my timing. Sure. Thanks, Craig, for that guess. Frantic about being late. Yeah, a little frantic, tense, revved up. Anyone else? I can say that this would often leave me feeling really frustrated, resentful about people not following the rules. Yeah, resentful, annoyed, aggravated.
Is judgmental a condition?
Well, I love that guess, Al, because judgmental is a thought, yeah? And when I think about the thought of judgmental, what might come up for me is sort of a righteousness, a level of like power over, better than, yeah? Okay, so those were some of the feelings. Based on my feelings, can we practice what my unmet needs might be? If we're looking at frustration, irritation, aggravation, did I say impatient? Maybe a little anxious, disrupted, agitated. What needs are calling for my attention? And use your needs wheel if you need to. But remember, sometimes the opposite of the feeling is the need. So if I'm feeling impatient, I might enjoy feeling more patient, yeah? If I'm feeling aggravated, I might want to feel more at peace. If I'm feeling anxious, what might I want to feel more of? Holler it out.
Calm.
Yeah, beautiful. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? What are some unmet needs calling for my attention?
Respect.
Ah, okay. And when I think about respect, when I think about that word respect, what feelings come up? Who can help me figure out what feelings are connected with that concept of respect?
Your performance and your sense of doing a job well.
Yeah, so maybe efficacy, competency, yeah, warmth, Okay, so what I've just done here is I'm getting you kind of stretching your muscles of feelings and needs, which is really at the heart of NVC. And it's a pretty simple process, especially when you have your feelings and needs charts with you. It isn't always easy though. And we're often hesitant to make empathy guesses because we don't want to be wrong. And remember what I said last time, there's no such thing as a wrong empathy guess. If I don't connect with it, I'm still getting the gift of your warm attention, your intention to want to connect with me. And if it's an accurate guess, well, that helps me feel more connected as well. So it's a win-win when you make empathy guesses. Okay, so that was a little diversion to get you connected with the feelings and needs. Let's come back to what my storyline is. What I've shared with you is my storyline is there's all these signs. They're specifically dedicated to people like school social workers, speech therapists, OTs, PTs, who come and go from this building. And what I'm seeing is parents are parking in those spots. Okay, this happened for days. And all I can say now is I'm so glad I never got out of my car and scolded parents for parking in those spaces, because one day I pulled into one of those spaces because I came later than usual. And in fact, only half of the parking spaces that were marked were for me and people like me who were providing specific services. And the other half were, guess what? Earmarked for parents dropping off their children at High Point with a 10-minute time limit on it. Can you imagine how I was feeling when I saw those signs showing me that what I thought was a clean observation was in fact wildly inaccurate? Help me out here. Again, what might have I been feeling?
Shame.
Anybody? Shame? Sure, a little bit of shame came up. What else?
Stupid.
Who said stupid? I love that. Yeah, I'm very careful about name calling myself, and I'm hypersensitive to people name calling themselves. It's so pervasive, yeah? But I did, I felt a little dumb, yeah.
You were a little bit lucky.
Oh, yes. I'm not sure who said that, but I definitely felt like, whew, that
Right.
was a close one. Because
Right.
I tend to get lit up pretty fast and tell people what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
And I felt lucky that I didn't do it. And someone wrote, Margaret wrote, relieved. Absolutely. Relief was way up there. I was so relieved that in my, what I'll call dysregulated state, I didn't actually roll down my window and start yelling at some parent. Yeah? Okay. Any other feelings? I'm thinking of another one that I was aware of. So let me give you a minute and see. Put yourself in that position. How might you have felt? Extrapolate it to me.
Humble.
Yes, humble. Absolutely. And I felt very embarrassed. You know, it was equal parts embarrassment, relief, lucky. it was just this whole conglomeration of feelings. And guess what? It also felt very familiar to me because I'm someone that sometimes struggles with impulsivity. I am not always easily regulated. I have a tendency to be a bit ADD in my brain. And so my impulse control is something I'm continually working on. Yeah, go ahead.
Wouldn't embarrassment require an interaction with somebody else, though? Can you have personal embarrassment?
I believe so. I mean, I didn't need someone else to witness me doing that to feel embarrassed. And I guess being in relationship with myself and having an awareness of where my tender spots are. We, as I sometimes talk about, we can have a tender relationship with our needs and feelings, and we can have a confident relationships with our needs and feelings. Typically, if you take a moment and consider what your tender spots are, you may have a sense of familiarity with them. For me, impulsively sort of making storylines and jumping to conclusions and then wanting to act on it is something I struggle with. Now, I've done enough work about this to give myself some loving kindness about it. I have strong needs for equity and for fairness and for things feeling safe and predictable. So these are where my tender spots are. I'm learning and more successfully than in the past that when I have that flush of aggravation, that flush of judgment, that flush of assumption, to pause, to wait, and ask myself, is there other evidence that something else might be going on here that I'm not noticing? The capacity to slow yourself down in moments of trigger, aggravation, being lit up, getting reactive, to take that pause, maybe take a couple of deep breaths in and deep breaths out to reconnect with myself, or in your case, in yourself, and have some warm curiosity about what might actually be provoking you, can go a long way to creating clean observations. Yeah. So let me just stop, because this was a lot of information I just shared. What are your clarifying questions or comments related to what I'm just sharing with you? Anybody? Okay, I'm guessing this makes sense because I'm not hearing any questions or comments.
Oh, I'm going to point out something that I think Robin put in the chat that I had the same thought. One of the other responses from you when you saw the sign correctly could have been, wow, instead of anger and whatever toward those people, is like, oh, compassion and care, loving toward them.
Yes. Transfer of aggravation from parents parking to school, which put up these. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, Craig, is this is my experience. If you were in this position, any of you, you might have different feelings and needs come up because we all have tender areas that might be different. So I'm sharing with you what my personal experience was. You can extrapolate for yourself what might have happened to you in those situations. Yeah? This is a way to sort of connect with, do you sometimes make assumptions about things based on your own personal bias, based on your previous experiences, based on what your assumptions and beliefs are about the world? So what I'd like you to do is take a moment now and just in your own time, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and I'd like you to think of a time where you were absolutely certain about something based on what information was available to you. And then when you got a little more information, you realized you had made a miscalculation. You had thought you were making an observation, but in fact, it was incorrect. It was an error. It was a judgment or a evaluation that wasn't really based on the facts. So let me ask, does this exercise I'm asking you to do make sense? If it doesn't make sense, will you raise your hand? Or if you need more clarity? Okay, so go ahead and I'll give you 2 minutes to think about this, think about what might have happened, and then touch into your feelings and needs about it.
Lisa, is the feeling, not the wheel that you're referencing, is that on this current handout as the vitality? Or is
Yes. Oh,
okay.
The vitality is the needs wheel.
Okay.
The feelings is a list of, I think it's laid out as feelings when needs are met, feelings when needs aren't met. And it's just a broad range of feelings. So both are handy. Look at the feelings wheel to touch into how you felt. Look at the needs wheel to say, oh, what do I associate this feeling with in terms of a universal human need? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And take 1 more minute. Okay. All right. So I'd like to hear, just for 1 or 2 of you, of an example of what we're talking about, an assumption you made that you were certain was a certain way, and when you got other information, it shifted your storyline. I'm less interested in the story itself, and I'm much more interested in what you felt on that discovery and some of the needs associated with what you felt. Is there anyone who's willing to share? Yeah, Craig, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, yeah, this is just such an obvious one. It's hit me a number of times while driving. Stopped behind some other cars at a traffic light, and the light turns green, and it is important to me that people care about driving when they're in a car, and they move when the light turns green. And when they don't move, I get pissed off, I get angry, I judgmental, and then I notice the ducks or geese or people crossing that I had not noticed, which is obviously why they are not moving at the green light. And I say, oh, duh, thank you for watching out and not going.
Right. I think that's a beautiful example and very common. Raise your hand if you've done this as a driver. I mean, most of us have this, and I'll even go so far as to wonder, Craig, if sometimes what happens is your storyline is they're texting, they're checking the radio settings, they're spacing out.
Sure, yes.
Yeah, because often people are doing those things. So then, you know, our storyline is, oh, this is what's happening this time. I will also say it happens particularly more often when people are a bit stressed. Because the truth is, when we are a little stressed out, for all the reasons that people mentioned in my example, which is running late, it's part of my job performance, a bit of tension or anxiety, we are less resourced emotionally. We're disconnected from what's happening in our bodies and in our emotional bodies. And that makes us less open to information. You may have had the experience where something's upsetting to you in the moment and it feels like you have sort of tunnel vision. You get so caught up in that moment, you really don't see what's going on around you. So part of this work of NVC, in addition to all these kinds of protocols and activities, is what does it mean to be more self-connected at any given time, especially when you're under pressure, when you have a time constraint, when you're stressed out, when you may be operating under a place of self-judgment, self-blame, self-recrimination, any of the things that are tender for us, yeah? This is why I think it's so valuable as part of daily living, whether you're practicing nonviolent, compassionate communication or not, to connect with your own living experience. Do body scans. Notice where you have tension. Are you holding your jaw? Is your gut clenched up? Do you notice that your breathing is shallow? The higher level of physical self-connection, the more choice we have about how we want to behave at any given time. If I'm really stressed out or exhausted or overwhelmed, I'm going to have less bandwidth, less kind of emotional bandwidth, less headroom to be choiceful, to slow myself down. So when I talk about meditative practices, mindfulness, these are all proven ways to support us being connected enough to imagine what it's like to be someone else. The easiest way to do this, that takes very little effort and energy, yet does get easier with practice, is routinely checking in with yourself of what is alive for you in the moment. And that's really Marshall Rosenberg's way of saying, what am I feeling in this moment? And what needs are calling for my attention? And when I say feeling, I mean body sensations, emotions, what's happening for you emotionally. Not your thoughts, storylines, assumptions, judgments, and evaluations, although sometimes we need that to get to what our feeling is. Not the faux feelings of, I feel manipulated, I feel abandoned, I feel judged, which are really saying to someone else, you're judging me, you're manipulating me, you're disappointing me. What's actually happening in my body? Where am I holding tension? Where am I clenching? Am I breathing? And then to connect with whatever those unmet needs are. Now, I also want to say that sometimes things are going really well, and those are celebrations. I'm feeling excited and happy and delighted, and my needs for connection, for collaboration, for ease are currently being met. Those are celebrations and really valuable. So I'm spending quite a bit of time on observations, because without what I'll call a clean observation, it's really hard to move to the next level of beginning to interact with another person around something they might have done or not done, said or not said, that's leaving me feel pained, sad, unseen, lacking connection. Okay? So let me stop there, because that was a lot of info about observation. What are your clarifying questions or comments about the role of observation in this sort of NVC protocol? And again, if you prefer to write your question in the chat or your comment in the chat, that's fine.
So I kind of have a question. So
Yeah.
When you have an emotion, your body reacts, and you can notice your body, and that helps you clarify it or understand. But I'm wondering, you haven't said this, I don't think, but I'm wondering if you notice you're clenching your teeth or whatever, if you can consciously reduce that, like relax it, will that change your emotion? Will it go the other way?
I love this question, Kathy. And what I'll say is, many people have the emotion before they connect with their physical body. Most people have a lower sense of body awareness than really serves them for all kinds of reasons. If you're someone with chronic pain, for example, it might benefit for you to tune down some of the sensations in your body, because it's really uncomfortable to be you, yeah? For other people who never really felt safe being in their body, that being in their body, they associate it with fear, anxiety, distress, abuse, or neglect. Numbing out and disassociation, disconnecting, was the safest, best choice, best reaction in the moment. These are painful and difficult things to consider. And if they're triggering for anyone, I want to hold you with a lot of care. There are many reasons why we don't learn to be in our bodies. So some of mindfulness and meditation and those sorts of things, especially yoga practices, are ways to connect our physical sensations safely with our emotions. Now, other people who have a higher level of physical awareness might actually notice the sensation of their heart beating faster and that sort of metallic taste in their mouth and a little bit of adrenaline kicking in before they actually can name the sensation or name the feeling. Does this make sense, following me so far? I'm looking for sort of nods of agreement or some sense of like, okay, this is making sense. I will say, in answer to kind of what you're asking, Kathy, is that the higher level of awareness I have in my body sensation, which usually comes first before me connecting with the feeling, the more I'm able to do that, the more chance I have of connecting with myself, taking a pause, and doing things that help calm me. Does this make sense? I'm going to give you a mantra that I believe is one of the most helpful ways to use NVC in what I'll call sort of emergency settings, where I'm getting reactive, I'm getting upset, and I need something to help pull me together. The beauty about mantras is I can be in my back lizard brain self where I'm operating out of reactivity, and it still works because it's 3 words. And the mantra is breathe, body, need. Gail, if you have a second, would you type that in the chat, please, to everyone? Breathe, body, need. The way this works is if I start to notice some sensation, I'll say to myself, breathe, body, need. I'll inhale into a slow, deep breath. I'll connect with my body sensations. I'm like breathing into sensation. As I exhale and soften, I connect with what need is calling most for my attention. Breathe, body, need is available to you anytime you need it, anytime you want it, anytime you want to touch more closely in to what experience you might be having. It's also, to me, one of the least painful ways to begin to up your practice in having a higher level of body awareness. Yeah? Okay, let me stop there. Clarifying questions, comments. You can raise your hand, your physical hand. You can make a note in the chat. All right. Now that we're going to move into this next level of preparing to have difficult conversations, can you tell me why you think being clear on observations will give you a fighting chance of connecting with another person? What do you think the benefit is of having a clean observation that isn't going to provoke an argument or a pushback around what happened or didn't happen? Who wants to try and put some words to that? Yeah, Gail.
I think they would feel seen and heard.
And do you have a sense that they might feel seen and heard because it's not blameful? It's not pointing a finger at someone and saying, you did this and you did that. It's more, here is how I'm holding this experience, which immediately creates the opportunity for people to be less defensive. Yeah? Think about the last time you got aggravated at someone and you started in by saying, you know, you always do this, or you forgot this, or you didn't do this, or why did you say this? That sort of approach may be what's going on for you. You may believe 100% that they're wrong and they need to be accountable and they need to fix it. However, what are most people's responses to that sort of approach? Tell me, what do you think? Go ahead and unmute, holler it out, or write it in the chat.
Well, they'd say it wasn't true. They'd maybe say, you always do this, or come back angry.
Yeah. I mean, what you're naming is defensive responses. Then where are you? Then you're just in the conflict. And is anything productive going to happen? Probably not. One of the hardest things when I'm in conflict with someone else is to slow down my reactivity, to first give myself some empathy for what's happening long enough to have a bit of curiosity about what it might be like to be them. This is absolutely at the heart of compassionate communication. The capacity in my trigger, in my upset, to have some warm curiosity about someone else's experience. And instead of jumping to conclusions that they're doing something because they're trying to be hurtful, they're inconsiderate, they're selfish, all the storylines I have about them, to come back to the observation. Here's what I saw happen. Here's how I'm remembering it. So I'm going to talk for a minute about what I call helpful phrases that can lead to more buy-in with someone. Because when you want to approach another person with some problematic speech or behavior, the more chances you have to connect with them and have them have buy-in and investment, the better the chances of it going. So I might start first, well, I'll always start with an invitation. You know, if you're in your work environment and you're upset with someone and you go barreling into their cubicle or their office and you don't knock and you call them out of the blue and you start railing at them, your chances of them hearing you are greatly diminished because 1, they're surprised. 2, they're unprepared. 3, they will feel like it's an invasion. And when people feel invaded upon, they get defensive, they get angry, they push back, they double down. So an invitation to a conversation is foundational. I'm going to come back to what that sounds like, yeah? Once I've offered an invitation to someone, similar to when we were doing gratitude practice. Hey, I've got some gratitude I'd like to share with you. Are you open to hearing it? Is this a good time? Similarly to if something's bothering me. Okay, I'm going to switch and give an example of this now. I might say, hey, last week, when we met for coffee, I'm remembering something about our conversation that I'd like to talk to you about. Are you open to having a 5-minute conversation with me about it? Now, what I'm doing here, I want you to listen to some things that I said here that will give you a fighting chance. One is when I say, I'm remembering, because our memories are fluid and flawed and impacted by so many things. And if I frame it as, look, I'm remembering it this way, you might remember it differently, and that's fine. I'd like to just talk about it and get some clarity about it. This softens the whole energy around it because I'm not adamantly telling someone what they did or didn't do, okay? The other really valuable factor here is offering a time frame. Now, I talked about this last time in terms of requests. There's some research that shows in heteronormative relationships between men and women, when something difficult is going to be talked about, talking about it typically raises men's anxiety. Meanwhile, talking about issues that are problematic lowers women's anxiety. So right away you can see the difficulty here, yeah? Now, this isn't 100% true. You might say, well, I'm an anomaly. I might be a man and I love to talk about and process things. And you might be a woman who says, like, I don't ever want to talk about anything. I prefer to be avoidant. And for any non-binary folks, you may go in any other direction. I'm well aware that this is a statistic that not everyone fits into. It's generally what seems to happen. And I will say, in my own private practice working with couples, I see this over and over again. So one of the ways to deal with this, however you identify, whether you identify as a she, he, they, or any other gender or non-gender specific role, when you offer a specific time frame, that typically lowers people's anxiety. Most people can tell themselves, well, I can put up with anything for 5 minutes. If this person's going to rail at me for 5 minutes, I can tolerate that, yeah? So I suggest this anytime you're having a conversation that has a bit of tension or conflict in it, to say, hey, I'm thinking this will probably take about 5 minutes. If it seems to take longer, we can stop at 5 minutes and check in and see, are we done or does it need more time? This gives a sense of collaboration with the other person and gives them the chance of having choice and agency. Yeah, makes sense so far? Clarifying questions, comments? Okay, I love that Greta wrote, the formality of the statement I said would be very alarming, and my answer would be no, immediately. Totally get it, right? Let me point out that I'm using formal NVC language here while I'm teaching. I'm not necessarily suggesting that this is the exact language you might want to use with someone, because it could provoke this anxiety of like, oh, I'm in trouble, I've done something wrong, I'm gonna get nailed. Especially if someone has a history of being blamed or not having an opportunity to really speak for what's true for them. Which for many of us raised in the culture we're raised in, there isn't a lot of room for that. So let's see, yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
I've had some training in lobbying legislators for change, and
yeah,
one of the things that was mentioned to us is similar. They said that stories are good if you tell stories, and they said a good way to introduce that is that, would you be okay if I told you a short story about something, rather than just saying, I have this story I'm going to tell you, or let me tell you a story. But I mean,
right.
It's really hard to say no, and that was I don't know how you're going to say no, but although Greta said she definitely say no, but
yeah,
it does mean they bought into it, because they could say no, because they said okay, then they have to listen kind of, or they have to respond because they said they were going to.
Right. Look, there are all kinds of, thank you, Kathy. There are all kinds of strategies to get buy-in. And you may be having this feeling like, man, this sounds manipulative. Like I'm trying to do all these things to manipulate someone into connecting with me. What I would argue is, well, first of all, if you feel like you might be manipulating, maybe you haven't quite worked out how you feel about the situation. If you're holding a tremendous amount of resentment and anger, it's not time to have that conversation yet. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, about preparing for difficult conversations. I like that Greta said, I'd be open to, would you mind if we revisited X? I mean, these are all beautiful alternatives. Now, I'm going to give you a phrase that I think can really help with some of this. And that is, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. And I'm taking a chance to bring it up, even though it might be a little tense, because I really value my relationship with you. Would you be willing to just talk for 5 minutes? When I start out by saying the reason I want to have this conversation is because I value my work relationship with you, or I value our collaboration, or I really value your input, or this relationship is important to me. This gives the person a sense of, oh, my chances of being safely held are better here. Now, you may still get a no. This is what's different between what I'll call making a request of someone and demanding something of them. If it's truly a request, you receive that no, and you take it in because you're not demanding something of someone. If someone feels at all coerced or worried or tense, or there's any aroma of coercion, or that they'll be punished if they say no, that's not a full-on yes. A yes is someone who's really saying yes. So anything less than a full-on yes is considered a no. So what do you do then? Well, one of the beauties of NVC is to operate under the idea that that person has a need that's wanting to be met behind that no. The need behind the no is worth exploring as a way to figure out a different way in. If you think the person's saying no because it doesn't feel safe to them, it feels like they're going to be worried, or they just don't have time, or they prefer to avoid difficult conversations, that gives you a little more leeway and play about how to approach. So if I make a request of someone and they say, no, I really don't, what's the first thing I'm going to do for myself before I do anything else? Come back to the first class and what I stress over and over again. What's the first thing you can offer yourself when you're distressed or triggered or activated or upset? Anybody remember?
Breathe, body, need.
Oh, beautiful. Great strategy. Breathe, body, need, which really is a strategy for self-empathy. Always come back first to empathy for yourself. If you can slow down and touch into your experience, what am I feeling? What am I needing? And then give yourself some loving kindness about it. Oof, I heard that no, and I immediately got a sensation in my body of tension. And there was an aroma of shame. And my storyline is that I'm too much, I ask too much of people, I come on too strong. Well, that's my storyline. My needs are to be seen for my intentions, to have self-expression, to make connection. Yeah? If you come to self-empathy first, that builds your tolerance for empathy for someone else. Clarifying questions, comments. Are some of you thinking, I don't know, this sounds like an awful lot of work. I'd rather just not deal with it. If you are, that's perfectly fine. We each get to choose how much we want to engage with someone else or not engage. It may be that certain relationships you have, the level of effort and work it would take to build authentic connection and to be fully seen and received and fully receive and hear someone else is more than what you have energy for. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have limited resources, limited capacity, limited bandwidth. So it's okay to choose, gosh, in this situation, I'm going to work this out myself. I'm going to use the process of figuring out what's upsetting me, what's bothering me, figure out what I'm feeling. Well, I might start even with, what's my storyline? What am I telling myself about this person or this situation? I might vent, I might complain, all in my head, not to the other person. Yeah. And then from there, get to a clean observation as I touch into my real feelings and my unmet needs. Even though in NVC, it looks like this protocol of observation, feeling, need, and request are linear, it's rarely linear. Often I'll have a feeling or an expression or a situation that I'm reacting to, and I'll feel it and I'll vent about it, and then I'll get to a bit of an observation about it. But then I'll get sparked by something else about it, and I'll go into my storyline. And then I'll come back to more feelings, and then I'll go to my needs. And once I get clear on my needs, I might be able to go back to the observation. And this is all a process I'm doing on my own, in writing, in my head, in my car, talking out loud, or if I have an empathy buddy with whom I share empathy, I might run it by them. So this is particularly helpful in situations where you feel like, if I approach this person, it's not going to go well. Which, this is part of life, yeah? Especially in work settings, especially in relationships where you just don't click well with someone else. And at the same time, you want to honor that your own experience is creating some pain for you, or the way you're being treated is creating some pain for you. Let me check the chat just for a second. Okay, I love these questions. First of all, I'm reading preparing in advance. Absolutely. Preparing for a conversation that you believe might be difficult or conflictual is key, and we're going to practice that in a minute. Diana's writing, isn't the effectiveness and success of using the empathy and NVC predicated on the other party having the same skills and motivation? The good news is, no, it's not. This is the beauty of NVC. I can practice NVC with anyone, even people who are resistant to it, as long as I have enough self-empathy, as long as I'm resourced enough emotionally to engage with them. That's the question. Because it doesn't do me any good to engage with someone if I'm not resourced enough, or it's going to do a disservice to me. That's that sort of idea of, if I'm attempting to meet someone else's needs at my own expense, that's not going to work. It might work once or twice, but it's depleting, and it's impossible to have that be, it's not sustainable. And in the same way, if I'm continually focusing on meeting my own needs at the expense of everyone around me, my interpersonal relationships are likely not going to be very satisfactory. So the key is that whatever someone is telling me or behaving with me, is I come back to self-empathy first, until I have enough warm curiosity about what might be going on for them. And then I might make a feeling and need guess in response to their anger, venting, aggravation, complaints to me. Again, it's very simple, but it's not always easy. It takes a tremendous amount of self-connection and self-awareness to do this. And if you find yourself trying to give someone empathy and getting resistance, or you start to feel overwhelmed, that's the indication it's time to stop and take a break. Authentic empathy is typically received. Inauthentic empathy, which is mixed with anger or resentment, typically doesn't work very well, okay? So let's come back to preparing for these difficult conversations. Before we move into that activity, clarifying questions, comments. You can write them in the chat, or you can name them. Okay, I'm aware that this is a lot of information I'm giving. So this is why I want to stop and make sure, if you have clarifying questions, of course, there's no such thing as a dumb question. If you're not getting it, that tells me I'm not offering it in a way that's easier for you to hear, and I want to adjust what I'm doing. All right. Let me ask you, if you are in a situation where something has happened with another person, where they've said something or done something, or didn't say something or didn't do something, and you notice that you're aggravated or frustrated or angry or disappointed, and you're trying to figure out what the next step is, what comes up for you? And what I'm asking is, are you the kind of person who likes to approach people about what's on your mind? Or are you the kind of person who will avoid anything that even has a slight aroma of conflict for whatever reason? Are you the kind of person who, in moments of conflict or difficulty, you freeze? Or you tend to get defensive and you fight? Or you tend to sort of check out? Or maybe you fawn. You know, you're obsequious and you try and make everything okay, make everybody happy. I'm asking you this, and I don't need to hear your answer. I'm asking you this because the more you know about what your reactivity looks like, the better chance you have of making thoughtful and helpful and empathic choices that take care of yourself without judgment, without self-recrimination or blame. This is the first step to preparing to have what might be a connecting or difficult conversation with someone else. Giving yourself some loving kindness and care goes a long way to kind of filling your own well. So the process for this, let's say you decide you've got a situation and you want to address it with another person. Use the format of first writing down as clear as possible what the observation is. If I meet a friend for coffee regularly, and my storyline is every time we meet, she's 15 minutes late and she never texts me. There's going to be a lot of blame in that, a lot of judgment in that. If I actually stop and say, oh, wow, when I think about my friend being late, I have a lot of feelings that come up for it. There's a lot of stories that she doesn't value me, that my time isn't important, that she's inconsiderate, that she's so flaky, right? Instead, if I come back to actually what's going on for me is I'm feeling a little hurt. And that's a tender feeling for me because I really want to matter and I want to belong. And of course, I want to be valued for my time and my activities. Then I can come up with a cleaner observation. Oh, the last 3 times we met that I'm remembering, my friend didn't arrive at the same time I did. And I don't remember getting a text or a call or anything letting me know that my friend wasn't going to be there at the same time I was. Do you hear the difference energetically in you're always late, you don't care about me, you're inconsiderate, to, gosh, I'm remembering that the last few times we didn't show up at the same time? Let me ask you, how does that land for you when you hear these 2 distinctions? Anything come up for you about this? What do you notice in yourself? How you might respond? Questions about this? Anyone feeling like, gosh, it seems like a lot of kind of manipulated language to get by in? Is that coming up at all? Like, oof, this is kind of this protocol that feels a little false or a little therapeutic. Like, this is how therapists talk. This is awfully formal. Anybody having that? Give me something here so I see where we are.
Okay.
Kathy, I see you unmuted. Let me hear from Kathy and then we'll go to Craig and then Joan maybe.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that I have the words to say.
Okay.
I said, I'm trying to figure out whether I would feel, as the other person, whether I would feel different. I mean, the first one is very accusatory. Yes, I would react badly.
Yeah.
The second one, when you think about it, we didn't arrive at the same time. That's kind of ridiculous. I think I have to say I arrived at the time we said, and you did say something, but it still ends up being the same thing when they actually process it. She's blaming me for being late.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and again, let me point out, if you feel inside that you're still super aggravated about it, and you try and talk about it in NVC language, I guarantee you it will land poorly. People have an acute sense of body language and unspoken energy. And if it doesn't match with the words, it will be dismissed.
But why are you even bringing it up unless you're being accusatory? I mean, otherwise you just come 5 minutes late yourself, or you just don't say anything about it.
And look, these are choices that we all get to make. You get to decide, is it worth bringing it up or not? Many people err on the side of, I'm not going to bring it up because I don't want to disrupt my relationship. On the other hand, I notice I'm having this building resentment, and that doesn't really work for me either. What I'm looking at here is that people have choices about it. Now, I see Robin's comment, it feels false. Maybe focus instead on sort of the compassionate understanding or reasons for the lateness.
Just thinking about how that would land on me.
Yeah.
I was the one being late all the time, and I was being rude about not explaining it or sending a text. I would actually appreciate someone saying something rather than building up the resentment. Now, if it was flipped and someone was treating me that way, I'd hesitate probably a little while to call them out on it. But if it was really bothering me, I think it would be more a discussion about, what's going on. Maybe we should set a different time. Is there a problem that's causing you to be late? I mean, more of a discussion rather than just dropping it. But I don't think changing the words changes that feeling.
I agree. This is where NVC can be complicated and have a lot of subtlety about it. There isn't it's not prescriptive. There isn't one way to do it that's going to work with everyone. Hang on, Joan, I see you. If I'm really close friends with someone, I might say, hey, what's going on? You keep being late. And I get it, but next time would you text me? And I have enough trust in that relationship where my friend will be like, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry. I just don't plan enough time and it's embarrassing and I'll try and do better. Yeah. What I'm trying to help you do is find ways to engage with people that allows you to remove your own judgments and storylines that can create the opportunity. I think my earbuds are dying. That might work better. Yeah. Let me go to Joan for a second. Did you want to make a comment, Joan? And then Craig, if you want to add something, you can.
But what I find very helpful in the alternative that you suggested, what you've been proposing and we've reacted, is that one, if I'm the person who's feeling aggrieved, I am wanting to be with this person. I continue to want to meet, but something is bothering me, and I think I could say, I really do want to meet with you, but it bothers me that I'm having this feeling. And then if I say we arrive at different times, or I'm arriving at the time we said, my understanding is that's the time we said, and then I don't hear anything from you. That protects me from being terribly embarrassed because I didn't realize she was using the wrong phone number.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's something about trying to get as clear as you can about what's important to you, and then deciding, is it worth bringing it up? Many times it's better to do this process yourself. What am I aggravated about? What are my stories about this? What's important to me here? What can I let go of? What can I? And everybody's allowed to decide for themselves, at what point do you want to engage or not engage? I'm operating under the idea that we're talking about situations where engaging is important, where having a difficult conversation is of value or necessary. And the point I want to make is it tends to work better. Instead of pointing the finger at someone and saying, you did this, you did that, you're wrong, you're bad, you deserve to be punished, which of course is a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm trying to make a point. and instead coming back to what is important to me. Instead of pointing the finger at what someone else is doing or not doing, I'm coming back to what I value, to what is important to me, and operating from that standpoint, taking responsibility for my own stuff around it. Hey, I'm noticing it's unsettling for me. I don't like how this feels. I love meeting with you. It's fun to get together. And I also want to agree to a time and keep to it. Again, it depends on what my relationship is with the person, what my past experiences with them, what they're not. Coming from a place of, here's an observation, here's how I feel about it, here's what's important to me about it, can give you a better chance of connecting. Joan, did you want to add something else?
Just that I think it's so important in this process to think about why you do want to address this with this person. And if it does hopefully have some aspect of valuing a relationship here and making it clear that that's why I'm bringing it up. I'm not bringing it up to make you feel bad or punish you.
Right. And you know, that's beautifully said, Joan. Thank you. This is where you touch in to what's actually happening for you. If I'm really aggravated and I'm trying to get a dig in at that person, I'm not really in a position to use NVC because there's going to be a disconnect there. If I actually really value this collaboration, this connection, mutual understanding, shared reality with another person, it's worth it. And naming that up front can go a long way. Hey, listen, you know, I really value our collaboration. I like working with you, and I'm frustrated about this specific thing. Is there a way we can shift it because this is really important to me? Yeah.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Joan.
And connect this to our practice of circle keeping, where we're trying to repair relationships and further relationships, to talk to the people who are in conflict that we're working with about whether they value the relationship and what they want to do there. I mean, the same framework.
Yeah. And you know, here's the thing. In mediation, you can't just assume that people have equal value for the relationship. Or often in mediation, people will come with this idea of they want to solve the problem, but really what they want is they want to punish the other person. Knowing this can help you then have a bit of empathy for what might be going on for the other person. Listening to the pain talk underneath their complaint. You know, my neighbor always does this, and my neighbor does this, and they don't get it. Gosh, it sounds like you know, having some mutual understandings of the boundary between your properties is really important to you. And you really want to be seen for having clarity about this because it helps you feel safer in your own home. You know, these are ways it's likely to come up, where we translate people's accusations and their anxiety and their anger into listening for the pain talk. And the pain talk is what they're feeling and what their unmet need is. Craig, I want to come back to you because I was tracking that I think you had a comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, but others and you have covered it in great depth already, so nothing to add to that.
Okay, all right. Preparing for a conversation ahead of time, I believe, is imperative to having a chance of a successful conversation. And by successful, I mean people hearing each other, feeling received, feeling understood, and having the groundwork for making new agreements, new plans, mutual understanding. As I said, sometimes preparing for the situation can help you realize, oh, my aggravation is more about some tender spot in me, and maybe I'll just make a clear request for this person. Hey, the next time we meet, and I'm going to use the protocol for person, location, action, time, and object, the Plato that we talked about last time. Hey, person, Next time we meet on Tuesday at 4 o'clock, which is the time, in the staff room, which is the location, I'd like to start, at this time, and I'd like to have 20 minutes to do this because I'll need to leave after that. And here are the specific things I want to cover. And if we don't get to them all, I'm still going to have a hard stop. Can you live with that? Now, I'm using this example because maybe this is a person who doesn't honor time. They come late and they're not considerate of when I have to stop and start and those sorts of things. It may be that I don't need to go into a whole description about how much I value them, especially if I don't value them. Do not make up stuff. If you can't think of anything you value about someone, don't say that then, because it will land false. Yeah. So do the prepared work ahead of time by first offering yourself empathy until you feel resourced enough to see if you have some warm curiosity about what it's like to be them. That is my barometer. If I don't have even minimal levels of curiosity to hold someone else with a bit of respect and care, I am not ready to have that conversation. And it typically means I need more empathy for myself. I may need to create healthier boundaries for myself. I may need to process it with another person to get clear about what is it I want? What are my outcome goals? How do I want this to, am I really looking for collaboration or am I looking to nail someone? And hold yourself with a lot of kindness about that and respectful accountability. If I'm ticked off at someone and I'm holding a lot of resentment and I kind of don't like them, well, then I've got some work to do before I'm going to try and approach them with a solution or a strategy or a request. Okay. When you are ready to have that conversation, you will have a fighting chance of being successful if you offer an invitation first. Hey, have you got 10 minutes to talk about something? To soften your language about what you're talking about. Hey, I'm remembering it this way. Do you remember it the same way? The clean observation as much as possible. This is what I'm remembering happened. Do you remember it this way? The feelings. Wow, I felt confused. I'm looking for some clarity. That's the feeling and the need. I'm feeling confused. I want clarity. In a workplace setting, drop the word feeling. Just simply say, I'm a bit confused. Clarity would be helpful. You don't have to use that word feeling. It's sometimes better just to say what your experience is. And then if you think ahead about what is it that you want different and put that into a request that includes very specifically who's the request to, the location, the action, the time, and the object, you'll have a better chance of success around it. Let me stop there because it's almost 1 o'clock. I'd like to hear from a few of you. Any follow-up clarifying questions, comments? Anything that you're questioning or that's difficult around this or that's not lining up? Yeah, Craig, go ahead.
It clarifies for me how easy it is for me to just go to the place of, oh, this is not worth the effort. This relationship, this connection, whatever, is just not worth trying to fix. And it's easier that way. Just walk away.
And look, I want to say, Craig, that's okay. It's perfectly okay. We only have so much to give. If you routinely are interacting with someone where it's dissatisfying, or you don't feel respected, or there's a lack of connection, it's okay to say, well, you know what? I'm not going to invest much more in this. And you might mourn that, or you might celebrate it. You might feel some relief. What I want is for you to have the tools that if you do want to engage, you feel confident that there's a way forward to do it. Now, look, we've basically had just a couple of hours to dive into some pretty deep and complicated aspects of NVC. What I'm wanting to do here is offer you sort of the the flavor of how this works, the beginning practices of NVC, and how you might begin to utilize it in your life in ways that bring more satisfaction, more connection, more collaboration. My suggestion, and this is typically the case when I'm doing an intro, is to first practice the protocol through gratitude. Spend quite a bit of time offering gratitude, using a clean observation, a very specific thing, one thing, how you feel about it, and what needs are met. Get that practice under your belt. Find natural language with it before you begin to address difficult conversations, because these are more complicated. And you'll deal with defensiveness and pushback and anger. And what that means is you then have to go into self-empathy and listen for the pain talk and make an empathy guess to the person who's coming at you. And that's a lot of work. Joan, let me hear from you one last time before we close up the meeting.
I was in a session with you and was so impressed by the value of this approach when a veterinarian was struggling with a conversation that she had to have with the owner of a horse who had died. Her operating table. And it wasn't that, you know, she loved the person. It was that she needed to address and repair the situation. So I just want to say the breadth of the possibilities here with this approach is just so impactful to me.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, Joan. And my guess is you're wanting to share how important it is as an element of moving forward authentically. We want to be our authentic selves, and we want to do that safely. The other thing to remember is repair, most of the time, is usually available. And repair follows the same format. What's the observation? What's my part? What can I take ownership for? What are my needs around it? What are the other person's needs around it? Hang on one second, I just want to read. Okay. Yeah, all right, let me say this. If you have a particular situation that you're struggling with and you're thinking, I'm really I don't know what to do, and I'd like to consider using NVC as a potential way forward, reach out to me, email me. My email is nvclisagottlieb@gmail.com. Reach out, remind me you were in this course, and I'll consult with you over email to either suggest a meeting one-on-one to give you some support or send you to some other resources. Because it's in this kind of thing where we just have a couple of hours, often more questions are raised than there's time to address. So part of what I offer is please reach out to me and I can offer you some consultation and some help. All that being said, I really want to thank everyone for being part of this. Craig, thanks for recording. Gail, thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you everyone who was part of this and engaged and interested in learning more compassionate communication. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We so
My
appreciate
pleasure.
your time.
My pleasure. Okay.
Thanks everyone for attending. And our next session is January 4th. So I hope everyone has a healthy and wonderful holiday season and a wonderful new year.